This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So in previous session, we were discussing options available in Power Query, right? So while taking data, so I'm just mentioning the same point again. So if you're taking data from any data source, don't stick to a SQL server. Consider this is for all data sources. And while taking data from any data source, in case if you want to clean or process the data according to your visualization, like removing unwanted columns, replacing values, and changing the filtering rows. So these are the various transformations available in Power Query. So if you think you want to process, if data requires some processing, then instead of processing the data in Power BI desktop, bringing the data into Power BI desktop and applying processing steps in a Power BI desktop. So here we have a Power Query wherein we can process the data before saving the data into a Power BI desktop. Okay, so we were going through these options, available options in Power Query. In today's session, so we will discuss these features available in Power Query: data source settings, and then addition of a new columns. And we can so far we have discussed how to remove unwanted columns, right, in Power Query. So here we have an option of adding a new columns. We can add a new columns in Power Query as well, and disabling dataset refresh. So far, if you click on refresh option, right, if you click on refresh option, it will refresh all the data sets. So when we click on a refresh, you should not refresh all the data set. You should not refresh a broker share data set. So it should refresh all other data set except the broker data set, which means when we click on a refresh option, it should not refresh a specific data set. Reason being, the data under the data set will never ever change. So there is no point of refreshing the data set if there are no changes in a database, right? సో డేటాబేసెస్ SQL సర్వర్లు లేకపోతే సో రిఫ్రెష్ ఎందుకు అవసరం లేదు కదా. సో ఇఫ్ ఇట్ ఈస్ టేకింగ్ 10 minutes, we have to wait for 10 minutes. So how to disable a refresh for a specific data set? Okay, that is the point. Next, we'll see the parameters. We are familiar with the parameters, right? We have seen parameters in procedures, we have seen parameters in SSRS, and now we have parameters in Power BI as well. Okay, then if you get time, we will talk about row level security. Okay, fine. Let's start with the data source settings. So data source settings, right? So in a real time, uh, we would have multiple servers. And let's say a SQL server, they install in separate mission. They install it in separate mission in a server room, one SQL server. Okay. In another system, they install a SQL server. Okay. In another system, they install a SQL server. So in another system, so let's take three systems for now. Okay. So three different systems. So they install SQL Server in first mission. They install SQL Server in the second mission. So they install SQL Server in the third mission. So let's say most of the companies, so they install SQL Server into three different systems, and they create multiple databases into these systems after installing SQL Server. So in a SQL Server, they create a multiple databases. Okay, now you might have a question: why they install SQL Server into three missions? They can install a SQL Server in one mission and they can use it, right? So why they install a SQL Server in multiple missions? Okay, so client pays hues, right? Client pays crores to the service providers like IT companies, no? So he does a business. Okay, he does a business like some business selling fruits, selling anything products in the market. He does some business. He captures a business information into a files. Okay, file. Then he come to us for a services. Then as a IT employee, so we will load the data into SQL Server. We will load the data into SQL Server. Then after loading, we will write a store procedure that we have seen in SQL Server, right? So after storing the data into SQL Server table, we would write store procedures for processing the data. After processing the data, we will present in a Power BI report or SSRS report. Then we will give this report to the client. Okay, let's say this is happening on server one. Okay, so let's say I have IDON resource called some John resource. John is a resource SQL Server developer. I have hired him. Okay, so I have received a file from the client. I have loaded into the SQL Server. Then I have written a procedure. Procedure is processing the data. Then procedure is giving the data to the Power BI report or SSRS report, and the user is running SSRS report and running, and he is dropping that file to the client. This is happening on daily basis. Consider this is a process happening on daily basis in every company. Okay, now all of a sudden on one day, John's birthday. Okay, John is a birthday. So there was some request into the procedure. ఈ స్టోర్ ప్రొసీజర్ లో చేంజెస్ చేయమని చెప్పి ఒక రిక్వెస్ట్ వచ్చింది క్లయింట్ నుంచి. ఓకే, మేబీ చేంజింగ్ మార్కెట్ వాల్యూ ఫార్ములా సంథింగ్, సమ్ చేంజ్ వి రిసీవ్డ్ ఫ్రమ్ ద క్లయింట్ ఇన్ అ స్టోర్ ప్రొసీజర్. సో ఆన్ హిస్ బర్త్డే హీ వాజ్ వర్కింగ్ ఆన్ ది స్టోర్ ప్రొసీజర్. డైరెక్ట్ గా స్టోర్ ప్రొసీజర్ వర్క్ చేస్తున్నాను అనుకుంది. సో ఎనర్జెటిక్ గా ఉంటాడుగా బర్త్డే అంటే. సో కాబట్టి సమ్ మిస్టేక్ హీ డిడ్, సమ్ మిస్టేక్ వైల్ డూయింగ్ చేంజెస్ ఇన్ అ ప్రొసీజర్, సమ్ మిస్టేక్ హీ డిడ్. ఓకే, he did a mistake and evening 6 p.m. కల్లా వాళ్ళకి పార్టీ స్టార్ట్ అయిపోయింది. సో he left due to some reason. Okay, but still the issue is still persist in a procedure. Now we have to deliver a report to the client, right? So user will run extract this SSRS report, and SSRS report will call this procedure is not giving a right output. Reason being, John made some change which was not working. Okay, so the procedure will give incorrect output. That incorrect output we will show it in SSRS report. That incorrect report will go to a client, right? So client will receive incorrect report. Then client says, I am paying crores to you and you are giving incorrect reports. Now I will leave this company, I will go to another company. Okay, so that's how they will react. So to avoid these kind of accidents, what they do, they will have a SQL server installed on 3 machines. Okay, and first machine they call it as a development server. The same SQL server they install into 3 separate machines. First machine they call it as a development server, and the SQL server which is installed in the second machine they call it as a UAT server, and the same SQL server they install in third machine they call it as a production server. So they would be, so every company maintains 3 different environments, 3 different SQL servers: development environment, and UAT environment, and production environment. So to avoid these kind of accidents, right, whenever, so in 3 different SQL servers they maintain same number of databases, same database in production server, in UAT server, and development server. Same procedure we create. First we create a procedure in development server, and we will test the changes in a procedure. Then if a procedure changes or looks fine, then we will put the same procedure in a UAT server. Then if the changes are okay, then we will put it in production. So let's say right now, so we have received a request from a client for a same procedure. Now John should not work on production directly. The reason being, client reports are extracted from a production. So clients are extracting reports from production server. So we should not make any change directly to the production server. Remember that if you get a production SQL server, if they mention a production environment, you should not do any changes without approvals from higher management. Okay, without approval, you should not make any changes to the production directly. This is a basic point. Okay, now if you receive any changes to the store procedure, anyway, the 3 SQL servers having the same store procedure, same code, everything same, right? Now John has to work on this development first. Dear John, you make a changes in a store procedure which is available in development server, and if do the changes, once you are done, let me know. Then we will test the changes. Once John is done with the changes, then he will put the same changes in a UAT server, user acceptance testing server. Then someone from our team, someone from analyst team So they will test the changes in a UAT environment. If they feel everything looks good, then they will move the same changes to the production server. So to avoid these kind of accidents, so every developer has to write a code or do changes in a development server or UAT server first. Post receiving a sign off on your changes. Sign off means email. On email, someone says this everything looks good. Okay. After receiving a sign off email, then we will have to move this change to production. So we are not allowed to do any change directly in a production. Any questions? So every company has a multiple environments like development, UAT, and production, and we are not allowed to do any changes directly into a production server. Okay, some of you can say, I am working in some small organization which is nothing but object twin company. So there we don't have a UAT and development environment. We have only production, and so everyone is asking to make changes directly in production, right? Companies, there are some companies, they don't have a budget for having different servers. Okay, there are few companies in a market, where they don't have a budget, they don't have a money to maintain UAT SQL server and development SQL server. So by the time they will maintain everything in a production, you have to be very sure while making a changes in a production. Okay, instead of doing the changes directly on a production procedure, you can take a copy of the procedure and you can make a changes. Okay, any questions so far? Most of the companies three environments ఉంటాయి, but only less number of companies లో మాత్రమే productions లో direct changes చేస్తారు. Okay, any questions on this flow? Okay, fine. So now how this is related to a data source settings? Now let's come back to the point how this is related to data source settings. So first, whenever we get a requirement, so first let's take a paint. So how this is related, right? This is related to our topic. This is related to our topic. So as I mentioned, we would be having three different missions installing SQL servers. First one, UAT. This is UAT, and this is a production. And okay, so production SQL server has a server name, right? So this is 1.1. Production SQL server name is 1.1. UAT SQL server name is 1.2, and development SQL server name is 1.3. Consider that. Okay. So development SQL server name is 1.3 and UAT SQL server name is 1.2 and production SQL server name is 1.1. Okay. Now, whenever you get a requirement to develop any Power BI report by using Power BI Desktop or Power BI Report Builder, right? First, we'll install SQL Power BI Desktop in our mission. Then we require data, no? So from where we have to bring the data? Initially we will have to bring the data from either UAT or development. So let's say I'm bringing data from UAT server. So I'm making a connection to the UAT SQL server through get data option. I am taking the data from here and I had developed a Power BI report. Okay, now I gave this report to the user, business analyst. A person from business analyst, he tested your Power BI report. Everything looks okay, correct, as per the requirement you have developed. You did a fantastic job. Now I want to deploy the same report into a production environment. Okay, production environment means then the same report is right now your Power BI report is pointing to UAT SQL server. Now you have to change the connection to a production. Okay, wherein you would be having a servers like a Power BI service or report server. Before this is a production, let's say this is a production. So some companies they have a budget for having UAT service and production service, but some of the companies they maintain only one service wherein they will have two folders. One is for UAT folder, one is for production folder. Okay, let's say so you have developed a report connecting to the UAT SQL server and you received a sign off. Now you have to deploy this into production or deploy chain. But this Power BI report is pointing to UAT SQL server, right? Now you have to change this connection. How do we change this connection? by using a data source settings option in Power Query. Okay, right now your report is pointing to EVT SQL Server. Before publishing this report into Power BI service, okay, publish deployment are two different words but same meaning. In case of SSRS report, we use a deployment word. In case of a Power BI reports, we use a publish. Both are same, but if in case if you're talking about Power BI, use a publish word. In case if you're talking about SSRS reports, you mention a deployment word. Okay, right now I want to publish this into Power Production Service, but I have to change this connection to Production SQL Server, right? Production SQL Server connection change here. I'll show you how to change the connection. Okay, so changing connection is simple, 2 minutes job, but you should know the story behind it. Okay, so go to Power BI. So now let's close this. This is a Power BI report, no? So consider all these data sets. Consider all these data sets are coming from UAT SQL Server. Now user has signed off this report, which means he agreed for this report to deploy, to publish this report into Power BI service. Now we will have to change the connection things, right? So where do we change the connections and things? Just click on transform data and you will get a Power Query editor. Over here you can see a data source settings option. Click on data source settings option. Over here you can see list of connections you have created in Power BI desktop. Let's say if you want to change the connection of a SQL server, select this connection and here we have an option called change source. Click on a change source and over here you can see a SQL server name. So consider this is, if this is a UAT SQL server name, then we will have to change with the production SQL server name. You can request, you can check with your teammates or your manager. So what is a production SQL server? So you can just take the production SQL server, update it over here and click OK. So this is how we change the connection. It's very simple. Close this. In case if you want to change the connection of, let's say employee table, we are importing from UAT SQL server. In case if you want to change the connection to the production, then click on data source settings option and over here select a connection and click on change source. Over here you will find name of the SQL server. You change it and click on update. That's it. Now I want to change the query as well. How can I change the query? So this is how you can change the SQL server name and database name. And in case if you want to change the query, so I have written a query, select star from broker, and later client had requested for adding one filter condition, like he wanted us to exclude a JPM lines. Then how can we do it? So in case if you want to change the query after writing a query and importing data into Power BI desktop, in case if you want to change that query, then simple approach, then just click on a broker and over here we have a source, right? Source option, first option, ఏ డేటా సెట్ కి అయితే మీరు query చేంజ్ చేసుకోవాలనుకుంటున్నారో just select that data set and right side you can find applied steps, double click on a source, just double click on a source. Now here you can change the server name, you can change the database name, or you can change the query also. If you don't want, so if you don't want to have a JPM lines, you just simple you can mention a where condition to exclude a JPM lines. Okay, any questions so far? Editing query while importing data, if you have written any query, if you want to edit that query, so just directly come to the applied step, double click on a source, you can find that query, you can change it over here. Okay, in case if you want to update the SQL server name, so instead of updating at a data set level, here also you can update it, there is no issue. Here also you can update, but here if you're changing the connection over here, which will be applicable only for broker, data set, but which will not apply for other data sets, in case if those data sets are pointing to the same SQL server. In case if you want to change in one shot, then go to data source settings option. Over here select a connection and change source. Okay, any questions so far? It's very important. Every company And if you are going to work on this particular tool, this is a mandatory point. This is a mandatory. This is not optional. After developing a report, you will have to change the data source to before publishing into production. Any questions? If you have any questions, just drop your question in chat box. So once you are done with the changing data source, then close and apply. That's it. Okay. So no questions on first point, data source settings in a Power Query, right? Fine. Next, additional columns. So in previous session, let's talk about how to add additional columns to the data set. How can we add additional column to the data set? Okay. So in previous session, we have seen how to remove, how to drop unwanted columns, right? Like if you go back to Power Query by clicking on transform data here, if you feel there are some unwanted columns, again, so a task for today anyway, you have enough time, right? Today is Saturday and Sunday. Just make a question, like you have to prepare answer for three questions. Performance tuning steps in SQL Server. That is the first question you have to prepare. Next question is how performance tuning in SSRS. Then performance tuning steps in Power BI Desktop. These are three very important questions that you would receive in interview. Okay, performance tuning steps in SQL Server, performance tuning steps in SSRS, performance tuning steps in a Power BI. Okay. So one of the point in a Power BI under performance tuning steps, right? While importing data into Power BI desktop, if you feel there are some unwanted columns in a data set, okay, if you find some unwanted columns in a data set, so you remove them. Don't keep them. So just if market value, if you feel maturity that is an unwanted column, we are nowhere referring this column into a visualization. Then why to import this column, which requires more space, right, to store in Power BI Desktop? This is a one point under a performance tuning steps in the Power BI Desktop. So remove that column. So we have seen how to remove these columns in a previous session detail. Okay, now in today's session, we'll see how to add a column, how to add a new columns. Okay, in Power BI, in Power Query, we have a three options to add a new column. First, sorry, first option is indexed column. Indexed column. Three types of columns we can add indexed column. And the second one is conditional column. Conditional column. I'll come back to your question. Okay. Third one is a custom column. Custom column. So let me read the question. So after importing, there's the question is the question which I received is, so right now today I require strategy column. I imported it, and later in one point of time, client said that column is not required anymore. Then how can we remove this, right? Right now you feel that strategy description is required and you imported into Power BI Desktop. So later point of time, if you don't require strategy column, then first you have to verify whether strategic description column is being used in a report, anywhere in the report. If it is being used, remove that, replace that first, remove that first. Okay, after removing that, next go to transform data, then again go to transform data, then select that particular data set and right click and remove it. So in case if you are importing it from a file, this is the best way. If you are importing it from SQL Server, exclude that column in a query itself. Exclude that column in a query itself. Try to remove it from a query itself. In case if you are not importing the entire table. Okay. Close and apply. Let's come back to our actual topic. So we are discussing about addition of columns, right? How so how many ways, how many types of columns we can add to the data set? How many types of columns we can add to data set, right? So let's close this out. Let's close this particular window. So we will open new window. We will open a new window. So meanwhile, if you have any questions, you can drop your question chat box. So how now I am going to develop a new Power BI report. So I'm going to import the data. So click on get data, click on get data option. So memory consumption చాలా high లో ఉంటుంది, ఒకటి చెక్ చేద్దాం. Click వెళ్ళి. If you open Power BI, memory consumption is very high for Power BI desktop application. See, Microsoft Teams is taking around 0% something, right? NMB తీసుకుంటుంది చూడండి. So in case if you are installed say Power BI, so make sure you have a 8 GB RAM and SSD. Okay, and click on get data option and go to SQL Server. We will talk on. So just import some data. So take a SQL Server. Take SQL Server name and go to Power BI desktop. Paste the SQL Server name and Power BI database name or here and import method and click OK. So now I'm going to import a table. Okay, so transform data. Okay, fine. So if you look at this data set, in case if you want to add additional columns to the data set, how many columns right now it has? Rank, broker, volume, trades and all. In case if you want to add additional column to this particular data set while saving the same into a Power BI desktop, in Power Query we have a tab called add columns. Here we have a 3 types of columns we can add. So those 3 type of columns are indexed column, conditional column and then a custom column. Okay, first let's start with the indexed column. So indexed column is equivalent to, indexed column means generating serial numbers. In case if you want to generate a serial numbers to your data set. So you are importing some data into Power BI desktop, but I want to have a serial number. Serial numbers means 1, 2, 3, 4. So series. So see, if you want to have a serial numbers to your data, then here we have an option called indexed column option. Just select this indexed column and where do you want to start the series, from 0, from 1, or you have a custom series. If you select a from 0 option, it will add a column which will give you serial numbers, but series starts from 0. Series starts from 0. Serial number 0 and choddu kadandi manaki, so we don't want from 0. Then we use the second option from 1. Series starts from 1. Serial number starts from 1 and you can see the serial numbers, right? And fine, delete this as well. And now let's say third option, custom option. Click on a custom option. Here we have to define starting value and increment by 2. Now the series is 1, 3, 5. So start value and every value incremented by 2. See, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Okay, do you remember any topic which we discussed in SQL Server equivalent to this, indexed column? Do you remember any topic from a SQL Server equivalent to this? The identity column. Yes, perfect. It's an identity column. So we have an identity column in SQL Server to generate a serial numbers, right? It is equivalent to that. Indexed column is equivalent to identity column. Okay. So in case if you want to generate a serial number, then we use indexed column option in Power Query, which will give you a serial numbers to your data. Okay. So fine. This option is clear now. First one is done. Next, talk about conditional column. What is a conditional column? So conditional column, I'll just give you in SQL Server first, then we'll discuss the conditional column in Power BI. Select start from EMP. Here, we will derive a new column. If IIF, if salary is greater than 4,000, and then A grade, else B grade. Okay, close it. This is a grade column. So I have written an expression. I have written an expression in SQL Server for deriving a new column called grade column. But inside that condition expression has a condition, right? So we call this as a conditional column. We can derive a column like this in Power Query, but we call this column as a conditional column. Reason being, here we have a condition in the expressions. If you have a condition in the expression, then we call that column as a conditional column. Like if you're deriving a column by placing a condition, then we call that column as a conditional column. Just go to Power BI Desktop, and over here you can write the conditional column and change in rank. If it is in positive, we will give A. If it is negative, we will give B. Okay. So now click on a conditional column. Here we have a conditional column. In conditional column, here we can mention if column name. What is the column name? We thought of change in rank, right? Let's take a change in rank. Change in rank is less than 0 అయితే, then B. Then B. Add one more class. Else case we take A. So it's like a if else condition, like case when it is like a case when statement, or you can make it, you can consider it as the if statement, if else statement. Okay. If change in column is less than 0, then return A, B, and if it is greater than 0, then return A. And here you can put the name of the column. Name of the column is grade column, just grade column. So now I'm deriving a new column by having a condition over here. Just click OK. It will derive a new column having two type of values, A and B. Now we call this column as a conditional column. Any questions on conditional column? Okay, fine. Next next type of column is custom column. But name లోనే కష్టం ఉంటుంది కానీ ఇట్స్ వెరీ సింపుల్ కాలమ్ అండి. క్రియేషన్ వచ్చేసి సింపుల్ కాలమ్, బట్ ఓన్లీ నేమ్ లో మాత్రం కష్టం ఉంటుంది. Okay, it's a custom column. Let's add a custom column. In case if you have a formula like so let's take a formula like you have a salary plus commission. This is a formula for total salary, right? So there is no condition over here. This is just a formula we are implementing, total salary. So this is a formula, salary plus commission will give you a total salary, right? So now see, here we got a total salary column by adding salary plus commission, but because of null values we are getting incorrect values. So let's handle null values over here. Okay, now execute it. So now this is a total salary. In case if you have a formula to derive a new column, then we'll go with a custom column. Now you understood, right? When we prefer a right one, in case if you're looking for a in serial numbers, go with indexed column. If you have a condition to derive values, go for a conditional column. If you have a formula for deriving a column, go for a custom column. Okay, let's implement the same formula in Power BI Desktop. Here I want to derive a new column by adding by performing addition of between previous quarter volume and a volume. Here we have two types of volumes, right? Volume and previous quarter volume. I want to add both and I have to derive a total volume. Okay, just click on where is the custom column, click on custom column option, and over here is a total volume. Make it as a total volume. So here you can put the formula. Okay, volume plus previous quarter volume. That's it. If you have a formula to derive a new column, here we can write a formula over here, but here DAX functions are not allowed. We cannot use the DAX functions over here to have a formula. So just arithmetic operators, small function, other functions are available, but we cannot use the DAX function. And click OK. It will derive a new column called total volume, and by adding previous quarter volume and then a volume, right? Any questions on this addition of columns? Just three simple columns. So we are done with these two topics, data source settings and additional of columns. Any questions?
Kasturi, whatever we have added those columns, it will add it at the end only, or we can add anywhere in that middle of that columns or starting of the table.
So by default, it will get added in the end by default. You can change the position if you want. You can change the position if you want. By default, it adds in the end. In case if you want to change, we can move it. Yes, we can move it. Okay. Any
Okay.
other questions? Let me read out. Column added at the end only existing column. Okay, yeah, I answered this question. So by default, it gets added in the end, but we can move the position. Like indexed column మనకు first లో ఉంటే better కదా. Like indexed column serial number first లో ఉంటే better గా ఉంటుంది అందరికి. So we will put in a first. And we can rename the columns as well. We can rename columns as here we can rename it serial number. Serial number. Okay, fine. No other questions. Any other questions? Okay, fine. So next, disabling data set refresh. Disabling data set refresh. This is very, very, very important. In I think in out of 10 interviews, I face this question in 4 to 5 interviews. 4 to 5 interviews led to disabling data refresh in indirect way. Okay, very, very important. Go to Power BI and save this. How to disable a refresh for a particular data set. Import the data. Okay, I have imported broker volume, right? Broker. So let's import two more tables. And let's import two more tables. Then we'll see how to disable a refresh for a specific data set. It is taking time. Okay. Go to database and SQL Server. Shortcut and shortcut. Hmm. Take the Power BI. Hmm. So let me import DEPT and employee and any other table. So I'm importing three tables. Load. So I'm importing three tables. So in total, there are four tables in our report, right? Four different data sets. Four different data sets. Yes, these are four different. Okay. So broker data set, DEPT, broker, DEPT, employee, region. Four different data sets. If you click on refresh option, this refresh option, it will refresh all four data sets, broker, DEPT. Okay. So if you click on broker, DEPT, employee, region, it is refreshing all four data sets, right? When you click on a refresh, it is refreshing all four data sets. But we know that there is no change to the broker data. Broker data ki inka lifelong next 10 years gani 20 years gani there will not be any change in source data. That is a fixed. So the data which is under this particular data set, broker data set, will never ever change. Okay, no need to refresh this particular data set, right? That is a requirement. So now how to disable a refresh to a specific data set? Then go to a transform data, and to which data set you want to disable a refresh mechanism, right? And for a broker, right click on a broker, and over here we have a include in a report refresh. This is the option by default checked for all data set. If you uncheck this, now this is not part of refresh. Now if you click on refresh, it will not go to the refresh at all. So we are disabling refresh. That's it. Close and apply. And now if you click on refresh, it will not refresh a broker at all. It will refresh only DEPT, EMP and region. So click on refresh option, and it will not refresh a broker at all. It will not refresh a broker. It will refresh only DEPT, employee and region. So I'm showing this option again. So in case if you don't want to refresh a specific data set, click on transform data option, and if you don't want to have a particular data set and refresh, right click on that, and here you can click on, you just uncheck this include in a report refresh, you uncheck this and you just close and apply. That's it. Simple steps. Now if you just refresh it, it will refresh only DEPTA and EMP, right? I think the third one is done. We are done with the third option. Any questions on disabling a refresh at dataset level? Any questions? Okay, next, parameters. So last topic in a Power Query. Okay, go to Power BI desktop. So what is the use of having a parameters? What is the use of having a parameters in SQL? So what is the use of having a parameters in SQL? Okay, for selecting desired data, for viewing specific information, okay, on your choice, right? So if in case of SSRS, right, we all know, right? So in case of SSRS, if client wants to view a specific data by selecting values in a parameter, like we use a parameters for supplying input values to the report. Anywhere, if you find a parameters word anywhere in a programming language or any tools, blind parameters, if you find that word itself, any textbook and anywhere you go, if you find a parameters name, if they mentioned parameters means they use a parameter. That concept is for supplying some values, right? In case of SSRS, we developed SSRS report, and user wants, here consider a user, and user wants supply some input values to the reports ki SSRS report input value pass cheyalante, again we require a parameters are used to supply some values to a report, or parameters are used to pass some values from report to the user also. It is for supplying. Okay, in case of procedure also same, right? In case of procedure also, in case if user wants to pass some specific values to the procedure, then through parameters we will do that. Okay, now in case of SSRS is also same, but in case of Power BI is again same. Wherever you find parameters is simply for supplying values. For supplying values we create a parameters. So here we have an option. Slices also used in Power BI. In Power BI in two different ways, parameters and slices. So that is the reason people are not knowing about parameters in Power BI. So Power BI lo slicers kuda same job చేస్తాయి కదా. It takes a user choice and it will pass those values to the data model kada. So that is the reason Power BI especially reporting tool ఏంటంటే the usage of parameters are very less. The reason being here we have a slices which is equivalent to a parameters, which is equivalent to parameters. So that is the reason the usage of parameters are very less in Power BI desktop, but in case of SSRS the use of parameters are very high. Reason being there we don't have a slicers, right? Perfect. Next, go to Power Query. So we will discuss more on parameters, and so I'll give you a basics in today's session. Later, while implementing, we are going to implement incremental refresh. Okay, we are going to implement an incremental refresh. By the time we will discuss more about on parameters. So in case if you want to declare a parameters, here we have a tab called parameters. So here drop down. In case if you want to declare any parameters, click on new parameter. Okay, new parameters. And so name of the parameter, so here name of the parameter, so DEPT number, and what is the type of value that you will carry into this parameter. Okay, let's take a job. Always we're taking so job. So job లేకుండా బ్రోకర్ తీసుకుంటారా, లేకపోతే బ్రోకర్ మేము తీసుకుందాం. ఓకే, లెట్స్ టేక్ అన్ బ్రోకర్. మీకు రియల్ టైం డేటా కావాలి కాబట్టి బ్రోకర్ మేము తీసుకుందాం. సో రియల్ టైం డేటాకి మనం ప్రాక్టీస్ చేసే డేటాకి డిఫరెన్స్ ఏంటంటే కాలమ్ నేమ్స్ దాని లోపల డేటాని. సో యాజ్ సూన్ యాజ్ యూ హ్యావ్ ద క్రియేటివిటీ ఆఫ్ అవతార్ క్రియేటివిటీ ఉండాలి. మనకి కోర్స్ చేసేటప్పుడు ఏంటంటే అవతార్ క్రియేటివిటీ ఉండాలండి. సో ఇంటర్వ్యూకి వెళ్ళిన తర్వాత నేను చాలా మిరాకిల్స్ చేశాను ప్రాజెక్ట్లో అని చెప్పాలి, ఈవెన్ చేయకపోయినా కూడా. సో 60% ఆఫ్ ద డెవలపర్స్ హూ వర్క్ ఇన్ రియల్ టైమ్ నో, సో దే డోంట్ నో ఎనీథింగ్, లైక్ దే డోంట్ నో ఎవ్రీథింగ్, రైట్? సో దే వర్క్ ఆన్ సంథింగ్, దే నో ఓన్లీ దట్ పార్ట్ ఆఫ్ థింగ్. బట్ వెన్ వీ గో టు ఇంటర్వ్యూ ఏం చేయాలంటే మనం అన్ని అవతార్ వాళ్ళు అన్ని చేసామని చెప్పాలి వాళ్ళకి. సో you have to imagine that, like I worked on broker volume data, I worked on broker data. So they would be, they will not know what is a broker data. So you can explain anything which as long as it is a reasonable. Okay, click on a new parameter and over here just take a broker. So after 2-3 months course in tarvata there would be a question, and మీరు ఏం చేశారు ఆఫీస్లో, వాట్ యూ హ్యావ్ డన్ ఇన్ యువర్ ఆఫీస్, వాట్ ఆర్ ద రిపోర్ట్స్ యూ హ్యావ్ డెవలప్డ్ అంటే అందరూ ఆన్సర్ చేయరు. ఎందుకని? మేము ఆఫీస్కి వెళ్ళలేదు కదా అంటారు. చాలా జెన్యున్గా ఉంటారు కదా మీరందరూ. సో మోస్ట్ ఆఫ్ ద మీరే కదండి, చాలా బ్యాచెస్లో సేమ్ క్వశ్చన్ కాడ స్టక్ అవుతారు. వాట్ యూ హ్యావ్ డన్ ఇన్ లాస్ట్ 3 years or 4 years ఆన్ దిస్ పర్టికులర్ టూల్ అంటే, సో వీ డిడ్ంట్ డూ ఎనీథింగ్, వీ హ్యావ్ గాన్ త్రూ కోర్స్ అంటారు. సో వాట్ ఎవర్ వీఆర్ డెవలపింగ్ ఇన్ SSRS, వీ హ్యావ్ డెవలప్డ్ broker volume report and region report and then trade blotter report, some 6 to 7 reports we have developed, I guess, right? So you can use those reports. These are the reports I have developed for my client and GPS. You have to create a story, and you have to be very good at creating stories. త్వరగా జాబ్ రావాలంటే. ఓకే, నెక్స్ట్ parameter. So parameter, so let's take a term broker. And here what type of value that you are going to store under this particular parameter. So what type of value that you are going to store under this parameter. So here we see the data type. Okay, data set name is broker name. Okay, now what type of value that you are going to store under this particular parameter is decimal number, date, time and duration, text, true, boolean, binary. So forget about these options. If you are not sure on type of the value that you are going to receive from the user, he can pass any type of value, whether it is a text value, integer value, date value, numerical value, anything. Then you go for any means it accepts any type of value. Okay, so safer side gondalante you take any value, which means it accepts any type of value. If you mention date time, no, if you mention date time, after mentioning date time, if you are passing some numerical values, it will not accept, it will throw an error. So if you are not sure what type of value that user is going to pass, you just take any as a data type, and then you can mention a value. So here this is the current value is, what is the current value? Have declared a parameter data type is any, and it stores any type of value. I am initializing this parameter with a JPM. Click OK. So this is how we create parameters. But then how do we use these parameter values? How do we use these parameters? After declaring a parameters in Power Query, we can make use of these parameters in data sets, applying a filter, right? So we have seen it in SSRS. Okay, parameters declaration tarvata మనం query level filter లో కానీ డేటా సెట్ ఫిల్లర్ లో యూజ్ చేసుకోకపోతే there is no point of declaring parameters, right? See the question, I got the question. So if you are going with any, what is the point of having other things, right? If I go with any, it's a generic, you have to take it a generic way. Okay, even any option the data type used, it accepts any type of value which you don't, which should not be a case in particular case. Okay, ఒక particular case లో ఏంటంటే it should not accept any value, it should accept only date value మాత్రమే యాక్సెప్ట్ చేయాలి, ఇంకేది యాక్సెప్ట్ చేయకూడదు కండిషన్ ఉంది. ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్ ట్రేడ్ డేట్ తీసుకున్నాం, లెట్స్ హావ్ ఎ ట్రేడ్ డేట్. సో ట్రేడ్ డేట్ కాలం వచ్చేసి కంపల్సరీగా మనం న్యూమరికల్ వాల్యూస్ తీసుకోవచ్చు. ఇది ట్రేడ్ డేట్ కాలం, ట్రేడ్ date, which means it should accept only date. If user is passing other than date, it should not accept it. That is the condition now. Then we go to date time, we go to date. So by the time we can use date, right? So in case if you are not sure, so if you want to impose the conditions అని, ఓకే ఓన్లీ డేట్ మాత్రమే యాక్సెప్ట్ చేయాలంటే వేరే దానికి వెళ్తాం, లేదంటే ఏదైనా పర్లేదు నేను మేనేజ్ చేసుకుంటానంటే ఎనీకి వెళ్ళండి. ఓకే, క్లియర్. నెక్స్ట్ So after declaring a parameter called broker name and initialized with some JPM, right? Now, so after declaring, we have to use this parameter in a filter condition. Go to broker, then we can use this parameter in a filter criteria where we can use here in a drop down and here text filters, and here you can go to equals. Just select equals. Then over here you will get an option of parameters, then broker parameter. So I'm applying a filter, I'm just canceling it. If you want to apply a if you want to use this parameter in a filter condition of a broker data set, then drop down and text filters, go to equals. You can select a relevant operator, in your case equals to, and you can change that. You can change this as well. You can change this, and here you can just change the parameter, and here you can see the list of parameters. Select, okay, click OK. Now we have taken a value from parameter and we applied it in the filter condition. Now you have a question which you are not typing in a chat box. Why we are doing the circus? Creating a parameter and initializing with a JPM, then using this parameter and filter condition. Instead of this, why can't we go to directly filter condition and check JPM, select only JPM, right? You have that question, no? So why are we declaring a parameter and initializing the value in a parameter and using that parameter in a filter condition? Instead of doing all that, no, instead of doing all that, so you can directly, instead of declaring a parameter and then using in a filter condition, direct గా మీరు ఏం చేయొచ్చు, ఇలా చేయొచ్చు. సో అన్చెక్ చేసేసి ఓన్లీ JPM తీసుకుంటాం. This is also best approach, no? This is also giving same output, this is also same. Then what is the difference between these two? Then why Microsoft has provided a parameter and initializing parameter and we are using it in a filter condition? And there are other advantages we have. So I'll tell you the other advantages. I cannot tell you all the advantages, but I can give you one advantage right now. So there are a lot of advantages. Yes, there are a lot of advantages. Go to text fillers equals to, and here we have a parameter and then broker and clock. Okay, okay. Now after doing this, no, just close and apply. Just close and apply. Now take a table and show some data. So take a table and show the broker, broker name and total value. So right now it will show only one line, right? So JPM total quantity. Now after developing a report, we can save this, right? We can save. Let's click on a save option. Now we can give the name of it. Let's give a broker report. Here we have a two save type. We have two types of files, PBIX and PBIT. Power BI template file and Power BI expression file. So PBIX and PBIT. There are two types. There are two extensions for Power BI reports and Power BI desktop reports. First extension is .pbix Power BI expression file, and the second one is a PBIT, is a Power BI template file. So Power BI template file. So you don't see any effect of parameters, having parameters in PBIX. So after this session, have a parameter and use that parameter in filter condition and save it as a PBX and open it. Close the window and open it and save it as a PBIT. Save it as a PBIT template file. I'm saving it as a template file. That's okay. Saving it as a template file. Now I will close this. After saving this as a template file, I'll close this. So let me save this. Taking time to save. Saving this. So ఓకే, సేవ్ అయి ఉంటుంది. పవర్ క్వరీలోకి వెళ్ళింది కదా. సో లెట్స్ సేవ్ ఇట్ ఇన్ డెస్క్టాప్. ఓకే, I saved it now. So broker name save అయిపోయింది కదా. Close this window, and this is a broker. Go to the formatting, properties కి వెళ్దాం and verify the extension. Okay, PBX అని ఉందా, open it, save it as a template file. Save it as a template. We have 3 more minutes and we'll complete in 3 minutes. Open this file and save it as a template file. So I saved as a PBX file. I'm opening it. So there is no change in a filter we applied. There is no change in a filter we applied when we run this report. When we run this particular report, it will show only JPM. It will show only JPM and total amount. It is showing only JPM, right? Now save it as template file. Template file. Which is not getting saved in template file. మీరు ట్రై చేయండి, మీ సిస్టంలో కూడా సేమ్ కేసు ఉందో లేదో సార్. టెంప్లెట్ ఫైల్ సేవ్ అవ్వట్లేదు. టెంప్లెట్ ఫైల్ సేవ్ అయింది. ఓకే, జస్ట్ క్లోజ్ దిస్, save, close, and this is a template file, right? Broker name template file. Open it. Now if you open it, and if there are parameters used in your PBX file after saving it as a template, if there are any parameters used in your report, then it will pop up those parameter names. Now you can change your selection. Broker kada man report. So now I want to see capital letters. Select start from broker. Now I'll go for GS. Provide a GS and load it. The one problem over here is after entering a value to the parameter, again it will go for dataset refresh. Okay, now you can see GS total value. So don't get confused. In case if you have a parameters declared in Power Query, and if you save it as a template file, and when you open the same file again, it will pop up a box for asking for input values. If you provide a GS, it will give you the GS related values. Okay, go to transform data, and if you just go to transform data, GS, whatever we entered over here, that will be stored. So this is not for client, and this is not for client. There are various usage, various other ways we have. This is not for client. This is for your just for knowledge. Okay, this is simple example I wanted to tell you. But there are a lot of advantages of having parameters. We will discuss in later sessions. Okay, this is not for a client. Okay. Multi-selection, multiple values. Yes, we can provide a multiple values as well. Just try it out. Okay. Any questions? That's all for today's session. If you have any questions.